Not sure if you have ever heard this story if you're from the Gen Z era, but somewhere in the 90s, a well-known radio DJ had a late-night show where listeners could call in to share their paranormal stories live. The segment was very popular at the time. One night, the DJ received a call from a listener who wanted to share a story about an accident. He related to the DJ that he was driving along a highway late one night with his parents, his wife, and their little baby. They were all asleep, and he himself was feeling very sleepy in the quietness. He was then jolted from his sleepiness when he saw a large lorry with only one light coming from the opposite direction. The lorry flashed by his car, its slipstream rocking his vehicle. He was shaken because the lorry was driving against traffic on his side of the highway. Before he had time to collect his thoughts, the lorry appeared in front of him again. He was blinded. This happened several times before the lorry stopped appearing in front of him. Suddenly, he was blinded by a single headlight reflected in his rearview mirror. The caller said he was terrified and began to panic. He sped up and tried to get away from the lorry. As he drove over the crest of a hill, he suddenly saw a single headlight heading towards him. He swerved violently to avoid it but lost control of the car, crashing through the highway barrier and into a deep gully. After relating the story, the caller said that he was very depressed because his parents, wife, and baby were all killed in the accident. In a sad voice, the caller said that he, too, lost his life in the accident. Then he hung up. The DJ thought he had been pranked on live radio and laughed it off before carrying on with the show. However, the next day's newspaper carried the story of an accident that happened along the highway described by the previous night's caller. A car had crashed into a gully the previous night, killing an elderly couple, a husband and wife, and their baby. Shocked, the radio DJ rushed back to the office to listen to the recording of the previous night's mystery caller, but there was only silence on the tape. From May 2010 to May 2011, I worked as a security guard at a hydroelectric dam in Virginia. It was a fairly isolated location. If you needed an ambulance, you could expect at least a 20-minute wait. About a month after I was hired, one of the guys at the dam told me that most security guards out there quit after a few days because they got so creeped out being alone at the dam at night, and he was glad I was sticking it out. In truth, it could be creepy. Sometimes at night, when I was patrolling the basement level of the dam itself, I'd think about the fact that I was 50 feet below the water line on the low side, the only human being in about a 1.5 mile radius. Sometimes I'd hear weird noises in the woods, or catch a flash of a shadow while I was inside the dam. It takes a lot to scare me though, and I knew I was either hearing critters in the woods or my mind was playing tricks on me. One night, however, something happened that scared the living hell out of me. It was a little after 11 p.m., and I was sitting in the guardhouse reading a book. Suddenly, I heard a tap at the door. What was creepy about the guardhouse at night was that when you had the lamp inside turned on, people could look through the windows at you, but the glare made it difficult for you to see outside. When I heard the tap at the door, I thought it was a bug hitting the glass. It was so faint, and I knew there weren't any contractors at the dam. I had the place to myself. Then the tap came again, more insistent this time. I grabbed my flashlight and opened the door. There was no one there. Then I let the door slip from my hand and shut behind me. To my left, previously concealed by the doors I had opened, it was a huge man, at least 400 pounds, wearing a gray sweatshirt and gray sweatpants. The sweatshirt was smeared with fresh blood. My heart started hammering, my blood ran cold, I was so scared I couldn't speak. As it turns out, he was a local fisherman who had been fishing off the bridge over the tail race, and he was wondering why the power company hadn't started back pumping into the lake yet, because they usually started a little before 11, and that was what always drew in the big striped bass. He was smeared with blood because he'd already caught and gutted a couple and wiped his hands on his shirt. He felt really bad when he realized that he had approached me basically in the same way that a murderer in a horror movie would have. I am thankful to this day that I was unarmed security, because if I'd had a gun, I would have either shot him or accidentally shot myself while trying to shoot him. Lived in Germany for many years while my father was stationed there, U.S. Army. We lived off base in private housing and I loved it. That country is amazing. The vast forests, the mountains, the countryside, the farmlands, the little towns, everything. I quickly became really good friends with some local boys whose parents owned the town's dairy farm. We were always in the forests running around and exploring, fishing, playing army, etc. I was around 8 or 9 years old around that time, 37 now. One night stayed late at the farm hanging with the guys. Left about 9 or 10-ish, it was dark, but then moonlight gave pretty good vision that night, I remember. I lived just across the soccer field and a small cornfield from the farm. As I'm walking through the soccer field, I see a bit of movement, just real quick, from the corner of my eye along the tree line at the edge of the field. I quickly step up my pace. As I turn to take my usual path through the cornfield to my house, I see at least half a dozen silhouette figures emerge from each side of the rows of corn on the sides of the path. I froze so hard. They just stand there. Then there's one behind me. Before I can snap around and haul ass, he asked in German where I was going. I turn around now and what I see surprises but relieves me also. I answered in English and told him I was heading home. He was then curious about my English. Turns out it was a team of special forces operators. I mean, these guys were decked out in so much tactical gear I couldn't comprehend how they were able to move so stealthily. Night vision goggles, packs, bags, weapons, there was even a dog. They looked beyond cool, who were using these small towns off base to do some training. I just happened upon them this particular night. I'll never understand why they chose to break cover and show themselves. They could have easily just stayed put and I would have walked right by them, none the wiser. They walked me home as it was on their way back, they said. Started off creepy for me, but it was actually pretty cool. An experience I will never forget that's always stuck with me. Cheers. 15 years ago, I went camping with 2 school friends in bushland that backed onto my dad's property in Woori Yaluk, Australia. My dad didn't spend much time at the house, but said we could use it as a base to dump any gear we might not need. He also gave me a heads up that he might creep up to our campsite that night and scare the guys I was with. We hiked from the house for about 4 hours through very dense bush, where we found a clearing and decided to set up our camp. Looking around the place for firewood, we kept turning up a lot of old bonas. Some so old they almost looked like wood. We concluded that due to the land once being used for farming, it was likely they were cow bones. We came up with a few more theories for the sake of scaring each other, then built our fire, even burning a couple of the wood-like bones just to see what would happen, and settled in. I was woken up by one of my buddies at about 1 a.m. who said he swears he saw torchlight on the tent wall. Excellent, I thought. We sat in silence for a few minutes before the light came back. This was great. I really hammed it up, making up stories about murders in the area and escaped prisoners. The light from the torch fixed on our tent then switched off. We could hear leaves and sticks moving around outside, and my buddies were on the verge of tears. Then we started hearing whispering outside, as well as some low mumbling. Dad had brought some friends in on the prank. Dedicated. The torchlight came back on and pressed right up to the tent wall, and a hand began tapping across the top while the whispering continued. My dad had brought some friends in on the prank and convinced them to walk 4 hours through dense scrub in the middle of the night just to shine a torch on our tent. I started to panic. Then it just stopped completely, about an hour after it began. We sat in total silence aside from the sobbing of my buddies, and at dawn packed up and got the fuck out. We got back to the house and Dad was there. He apologized and said he'd planned to come out and see us last night but fell asleep at his girlfriend's house. We told him about what happened and he was genuinely dumbfounded. Interestingly, I went back to the spot a couple of years ago after telling this story to a friend. We found a small shack made of corrugated iron, pockmarked with bullet holes, a 44-gallon drum full of burned clothes, a pile of firewood, and 2 axes. Who knows if it's related, but it was very creepy. My dad told me and my brothers this story when we were growing up, and it's always stuck with me, particularly on long drives when I'm feeling a bit sleepy. The first time I remember hearing it was after I asked him if angels were real. I was probably 7 or 8. He drove trucks decades ago, before I was born, and before labor laws around limits and brakes were more standard. I'm assuming it's different now. He'd fairly regularly accept calls that would extend his shift to where he was driving 24, 36ers or more without a break, longer than a quick bathroom or fast food stop. My dad has a pretty mathematical brain. He's the type to make up logic puzzles out of something totally mundane just for fun. Whenever we were driving around town, he'd regularly ask me things like how long would it take us to get from home to the store if we were going 30 was mepewerchich, but had to stop for 5 minutes in the middle because a family of kittens were crossing the road, etc. He'd come up with similar equations for himself while he was driving solo that involved things he was seeing like the odometer, mileage markers, the time, and then he could test his speed based on the equation, etc. One night after having already driven a particularly long day, he noticed his eyes getting droopier and the whole roll down the window and blast the music up thing didn't seem to be helping much. It was a rainy night on a pretty windy mountain road without a shoulder to pull over safely, so he started doing those logic games out loud to keep alert and awake. He was saying something to the effect of, "I just passed mile marker 146, so what time will it be when I reach 200 if I'm going 55 I'm by he?" Then he closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and felt his head do the nod jerk thing, which woke him up with a gasp. He opened his eyes to see he was driving straight towards mile marker 158, which would have sent his whole truck tumbling down a random-ass mountain ravine. He was able to correct the course safely back, but it was a matter of seconds between that reality and certain death. He insists to this day that he slept through 12 miles of windy mountain road going 60 plus mph, only to wake up right at the last moment between life and death. The story usually ends with him tearing up saying, "I don't know if there's angels, but I know there's something bigger going on in this universe than our human brains have been able to understand yet. If I wouldn't have woken up right when I did, you kids wouldn't be here today," and that's something that feels pretty close to spiritual. I've crossed the states many times in my career. I used to tour manage a band that consisted of 4 musicians and 2 crew, so it was a total of 7 of us. We would often drive a white Sprinter van with a U-Haul trailer on the back, and if you're familiar with U-Haul, you know they have different pictures on the sides of them, often a state and something significant from that state painted on the side. We were about an hour outside of Roswell, New Mexico at 2 a.m. It was in the summer. We were coming from having just played the New Mexico State Fair. In every direction around us, it was pitch black. No lights from cities or even rest stops, no other cars, nothing. We have absolutely no phone signal. All of our phones say no signal at the same time. It's a 2-lane highway, the only illumination coming from our headlights. We haven't seen another car for a very long time. Suddenly on the horizon, we see a light appear directly ahead of us. We keep driving normally and the light is approaching us quickly. We, rightly, just assume it's another car coming our way on the other side of the highway. But then as the vehicle goes to pass us, it's a white Sprinter van towing a U-Haul trailer with the exact same state artwork as ours on the side. Same tires, same model van, same trailer, same everything. And as soon as we pass it, it's gone. All of us very uncomfortably said the same thing at the same time. Did that van have the same "what are the chances he'll never forget it"? We couldn't do anything but just uncomfortably acknowledge we all saw the same thing and none of us were losing our minds. I was driving to pick up my friend from the airport around 10 at night. His girlfriend was also with me as she wanted to see him. We were going down some dark, lonely back road. I've never been that way before, but I was following good old Apple Maps. Eventually, we came up alongside a train that was matched with our speed, so we couldn't see out past it on the right side of the car. After a couple minutes of that, we came upon a train yard on our left. Nothing crazy yet, except for the fact that it went on and on and on. We probably spent 10 minutes driving at 45 miles an hour down a dark back road, with a train yard on our left and a train on our right blocking the view. Eventually, we made it back into society and picked up my friend from the airport. We told him all about the spooky train yard and train, and were excited to drive back and show him just how much it was like a generic horror film. We drove back down the same roads. It wasn't there. We never passed a train yard. There were no trains on the tracks, now on our left. Friend's girlfriend and I flipped out. We swore up and down we drove right along the train yard for a long time. The drive home felt much shorter.